lots of times when I've been treating people for depression, for example, or anxiety, they have existential issues, you know. It's not just some psychiatric condition. It's not just that they're tapped off of normal because their brain chemistry is faulty, although, you know, sometimes that happens to be the case. It's that they are overwhelmed by the suffering and complexity of their life, and they're not sure why it's reasonable to continue with it. You know, they can feel the terrible negative meanings of life, but are skeptical beyond belief about any of the positive meanings. I had one client who was a very brilliant artist, and as long as he didn't think, he was fine, you know, because he'd go and create, and he was really good at being an artist. He just, you know, he had that personality that was continually creative and quite brilliant, although he was self-denigrating. But as soon as he started to think about what he was doing, then, you know, it's like a drill or a saw or something like that. He'd saw the branch off that he was sitting on, because he'd start to criticize what he was doing, even the utility of it, even though it was sort of self-evidently useful. And then it would be very, very hard for him to even motivate himself to create. And he always struck me as a good example of the consequences of having your rational intellect divorced in some way from your being, divorced enough so that it actually questions the utility of your being. And it's not a good thing. It's not a good thing. And it's really not a good thing, because it manifests itself not only in individual psychopathology, but also in social psychopathology. And that's this proclivity of people to get tangled up in ideologies, which I really do think of as they're like crippled religions. That's the right way to think about them. They're like a religion that's missing an arm and a leg but can still hobble along, and it provides a certain amount of security and group identity, but it's warped and twisted and demented and bent, and it's a parasite on something underlying that's rich and true, and that's how it looks to me anyways. And so I think it's very important that we sort out this problem. I think that there isn't anything more important that needs to be done than that. I've thought that for a long, long time, probably since the early 80s, when I started looking at the role that belief systems played in regulating psychological and social health. Because you can tell that they do that because of how upset people get if you challenge their belief systems. It's like, why the hell do they care exactly? What difference does it make if all of your ideological axioms are 100% correct? Like, people get unbelievably upset when you poke them in the axioms, so to speak. And it is not by any stretch of the imagination obvious why, you know. But it's like there's a fundamental truth that they're standing on. It's like they're on a raft in the middle of the ocean, and you're starting to pull out the logs, you know, and they're afraid they're going to fall in and drown. It's like, drown in what? And what are the logs protecting them from? And why are they so afraid to move beyond the confines of the ideological system? And like, these are not obvious things. So I've been trying to puzzle that out for a very long time, and I've done some lectures about that are on YouTube. Most of you know that. And some of what I'm going to talk about in this series you'll have heard if you've listened to the YouTube videos. But, you know, I'm trying to hit it from different angles. And so Nietzsche's idea was that human beings were going to have to create their own values, essentially. Now, he understood that we had bodies and that we had motivations and emotions. Like, he was a romantic thinker in some sense, but way ahead of his time, because he knew that our capacity to think wasn't some free-floating soul, but was embedded in our physiology, constrained by our emotions, shaped by our motivations, shaped by our body. He understood that, but he still believed that the only possible way out of the problem would be for human beings themselves to become something akin to God and to create their own values. And he thought that he talked about the person who could create their own values as the overman or the superman, and that was one of the parts of Nietzschean philosophy that the Nazis, I would say, took out of context and used to fuel their, you know, superior man ideology. So, and we know what happened with that. That didn't seem to turn out very well, that's for sure.